Hey everybody, this is Jason Alba. Thank you so much for coming out today and spending the next hour or two, well, not two, hour and a half maybe, with us and talking about some, honestly, some exciting things. So I don't know, if you were to have told me earlier in my career or when I was in a job search that networking was something exciting, I would have turned the other way, really. I like people, I like humans, I like talking to people, and you may have been misled in these presentations that I'm an extrovert, but I am absolutely not an extrovert, although my wife argues that I am. So anyways, today we are talking about networking, and just because this is sponsored by Pluralsight, I had to put networking with humans. We're not going to talk about LANs and WANs and all of that stuff, IP addresses or whatever. We are really talking about networking with humans, specifically through the lens of a job search. Although because this is principle-based, pretty much anything I talk about will apply whether you're in a job search or you're not in a job search. I call it in between job searches. I'm guessing some of you here will be in between job searches. You're not in a job search right now, but you might be sometime soon. You'll notice down at the bottom on the slides, my Twitter handle is @JasonAlba, and I've gotten more active there in the last year. Feel free to ask questions, shout out, do whatever with Twitter on at our Twitter /JasonAlba. Also, if you have any questions, find the Q&A box, the question box on the Zoom interface, and I'm watching it. I have it open. I'm probably going to go through the presentation and then answer them at the end of the session. And then you can also switch from the slides to me. You can have slides big or me big. Yesterday, somebody asked if the slides were supposed to progress because I stayed on one slide for a while, and these are not slide-centric. They're kind of my face-centric. So with that, let's jump right in. So I'm trying to be a little bit better with having a little more slides. So instead of 2 or 3, we're going to talk about a few different things. So we'll talk first about principles around networking. We'll talk about informational interviews, newsletters, which I love the concept of having a job search newsletter. So we're going to jump into that in a little bit. And I don't want you to be intimidated. This is not some big marketing thing, and it's not a very complex thing, but I did come up with a format that I think is really, really effective and really cool. Storm starter calls is an idea I got from a friend of mine. We'll talk about that. I want to talk about the concept of being the creator. And I'll leave it at that for now. I want to talk about online networking, offline networking, and of course, you can't get away from anything I do without talking about follow-ups. So that's what we're going to jump into today. Notice we're not doing an introduction or overview of the series. I'll talk about the next 2 sessions, which is next week at the end of this presentation. All right, once again, you'll be able to download the slides, and then you'll see links to relevant stuff that I talk about at jibberjobber.com/PS for Pluralsight. And yesterday's slides and today's slides and all that stuff will hopefully be up by tonight or tomorrow. All right, here are some relevant Pluralsight courses, and I kind of feel bad putting this together because I want to give shout outs to my colleagues, but I didn't really find anything on networking with humans. And so this is it feels a little bit selfish of me, but the 6 courses that I want to talk about are all from me. So I don't know if I should feel proud about that or a little bad about that. But each of these courses I think are really relevant to what we're talking about today. So the first one is called Becoming a Better Listener. And there is no question in my mind that if we are going to network with other people, if we're going to communicate with humans, we need to understand better how to listen. When I was doing this course, I thought, this is kind of a boring course. Like, everybody knows how to listen and pick up on cues and hear messages and stuff like that. But when I was creating the course, first of all, I had a lot of fun creating the course because there was some stuff that I thought was really cool to say, like turn off your other stuff, turn off Outlook. If you're in a webinar, turn everything off. There's distractions. And I know that nowadays we're on so many calls and webinars and stuff, and we can multitask and do things in the background, but really you're not, right? And so I learned about active listening, which I kind of understood the concept and the principle of active listening, and I'd practiced it before, but this idea of really doing quote unquote active listening can take your relationships and your communication way up, like notches up, not just a notch, but not multiple notches up. So Becoming a Better Listener course, while I kind of thought nobody would be interested in, nobody would watch, this has actually become one of my more popular courses. And as far as networking goes, please, please, please don't be that person that goes into a network meeting or conversation, hijacks the conversation. It's all about you. And then you never listen to the other person, because the other person's going to walk away thinking, what a jerk, right? So Becoming a Better Listener. The next one is on informational interviews, which we'll talk about as one of the bullet points from today. And we've talked about it a few times in the past sessions. Informational interviews are so phenomenally cool. And so we'll spend more time on that. Working and communicating with different personalities. I had to throw this one in because as you network, you're going to communicate with, and you're going to meet, and you're going to try and develop a professional relationship with people that aren't like you, and they don't, and you won't understand them, right? You're going to have these conversations, and they're going to say things, and you're going to be like, wow, that person is a turd, like why did they say it that way, or why are they doing this, or da da da. And so one of the things I learned, there was somebody that I had an experience with, and it was not a favorable experience. And I was talking with somebody else about it, just kind of thinking through what was going on. And I said, I actually realized that that's their personality. Like that's who they are. They're not a jerk, and they don't hate me. And it took me a long time to realize the other person didn't hate me. But once I realized that, and I could understand more about their personality and their heart and their internal characteristics, I had a much better relationship with that person, and I wasn't stressed out going into that meeting. And so I'm not saying that I want you to be in situations where you're going to be stressed out, but I think inevitably, if you're going to be networking with people, you're going to come across people that are just off and different, but it doesn't mean that they're bad people, and that they have bad intentions, and that they don't want to help you, and that you shouldn't have a relationship. I think really it just means that we need to understand our own personality or personalities, right? And we need to understand other people's personalities so that we can really optimize the relationship and understand who we do well with. All right, effective email communication. This is another one that I thought, all right, everybody knows how to do emails. Apparently not. I have a whole section, I have a whole group of emails in my email that I will get to when I have time. The type, these are really long emails, and they're complex, and there's a lot to them, and I really need to concentrate when I read them. And the reality is I never get to them because I never make time. They're too long. And so as I put together this course on effective email communication, one of the words that you'll hear probably 1 or 2 dozen times is concise. I want your messages to be concise and to the point, and have a point even. I remember sometimes I'd read these emails from people that are reaching out to me after, a networking event, and they say something, and I'm like, I read the whole email, and I'm like, I don't even know what's going on here. Like, what are you saying? What do you want to do, et cetera, et cetera. So effective email communication is another course that I thought wasn't going to be do very well, but it's actually been pretty popular as far as my courses go. Another one is effective phone skills. And I mentioned yesterday that job seekers are afraid of the phone. Like, this is a generalization, but generally most people want to do online stuff for their job search, and they don't want to do phone stuff. It's like we've grown allergies to the phone. And the way that I heard it, my favorite way that I've heard it years ago, was that as a job seeker, the phone weighs 500 pounds. Like you can't lift it up because it's so heavy. And it's just because we're afraid. And so I have I have an idea. I'm not sure if I have it in my notes, so I'll just tell you right now. One of my most favorite ideas as a job seeker for phone stuff, if you're nervous, right? I mean, I think you should at least write out what your bullet points are of the conversation that you want to have. You know, hey, Jan, this is Jason Alba. I was introduced to you, or I was referred to you by so-and-so who told me that I should get in touch. And I just wanted to da-da-da. So this would be a conversation that you'd have, and you would write your bullet points out. Like, I want to have a conversation with you. When can we get together, or something like that. And so you can write your bullet points out, and you can even script it. And honestly, I generally don't like the concept of scripting and memorizing, but the more I've done this type of stuff, the more I've realized that scripting it is not bad and memorizing it is not bad. You can still definitely have everything sound natural, and you can be genuine, but you don't have to be off the cuff. So if you get any jitters at all, I would definitely recommend that you have your bullet points right in front of you, or you have a script right in front of you, and use that if you need to use that. So here's my trick though. My trick is if you do that and you're still nervous, right? Because especially at the beginning, you're going to be nervous. If you do that and you're still nervous, then call somebody after hours. Especially if it's their office number, because they're probably not going to be at the office after hours. The cell phone is a little trickier. If you have their cell phone, you might not want to call them at 11 o'clock at night or 4 o'clock in the morning, or 5, or whenever you wake up. But if you have an office number, call them and get their voicemail, right? You don't have to talk to them on the phone on the first try. And so that's just a trick. If you're really nervous, don't call them at 10 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon. Call them at like 7 or 8 or 9 at night when they're not going to be there, and you'll go straight to voicemail. All right. Another one is leading with emotional intelligence. And I was excited to do this course. I think I did it, what are we in, May? I want to say about a year ago. This is one of my most favorite courses that I've ever done. This is a change the world course. This is learning about emotional intelligence and your own level of emotional intelligence, and how to improve emotional intelligence, and how to kind of expand the message of the value of emotional intelligence in the office and in humanity is so important. And if there is a mission that I have in life, it's to help people become more self-aware and more aware of others and the other components that have to do with emotional intelligence. As we increase the elements of emotional intelligence, I'm going to network better. I'm going to pick up on those cues better. I'm going to understand you better. I'm going to care about you better. All of the things that I need to do to have real and good and long-term relationships are going to be better. All right, so let's start off with networking principles. So there's just a few kind of foundational things that I want to mention before we jump into some of the tools or tactics of networking. So the first one is, I need you to think about networking combined with personal branding. You can't separate the two. When we talk about the idea of the hidden job market, right? We talked about that yesterday and I think last week. So the hidden job market scenario is where there's a group of people in a meeting, and somebody says, hey, we just got approval for 1 or 2 new hires. Who do you know? I want you to be known. I want someone in that meeting to say, oh my gosh, you should talk to Sam. And here's what Sam does, and here's her portfolio and all these other things. And so when you network, I think one of my mistakes that I first made when I was first starting to network was I thought it was a numbers game. I thought I had to go to meetups. I thought I had to collect a certain number of business cards. Like I had all these assumptions. When I went there, I had to be outgoing, right? I had to like be a fake extrovert. Nothing wrong with extroverts. It's just not who I am. It was draining, right? And so I had all these ideas and expectations, but really what I really needed to do was make sure that people kind of knew who I was, and they knew what I was after. And what that means is you need to have your tagline. You need to understand what your brand is, or what you want your brand to be, how you want other people to perceive you. Networking is not just this thing where you go and collect business cards and it's this weird numbers game. There's a lot more to the value of networking than just going out and having stacks. Does anybody else have stacks of business cards, maybe with rubber bands around them? I remember I'd come back from conferences and I'd have stacks, and that's like, okay, this group and with this rubber band is from that conference, and this is from the other conference, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, another principle that I want to talk about is actually 2 in 1. It's a two for, or actually it's one concept in 2 words, and they sound so similar, but they really are different. Okay, so the words are consistency and frequency. They really are almost the very same concept, but they're just different enough that I want to break them out. So consistency means I do it more than once. Okay, sometimes I think the mistake that we make when we follow up with people is that we follow up and then that's it. There's nothing after that. And so what I want to have is more than one follow-up. I see this also on LinkedIn. People will write this nice little message to me about why or how we should connect on LinkedIn, and here's how I met you, and we'll be best friends and all this stuff. That nobody says that to me, but there's this idea that we're going to have a great professional relationship, and I accept their invitation, and guess what? I never hear from them again. And I know why. It's hard to start and maintain professional relationships, but we're talking about networking here, right? We're talking about proactively managing our careers. And so I want you to think about, how can I have multiple touch points over the years with my network instead of just one time and then they'll come to me when they need me, right? The other one is frequency. And so like I said, they're really closely tied together, but the idea of frequency is with what regularity am I messaging people? Am I putting somebody on a newsletter that goes out once a month or once a quarter, depending on what my needs are and what my situation is? Am I touching them once a year, right? There's some people in my network that I'll get end of year holiday cards from once a year. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. And actually it is kind of fun. I look forward to seeing their stuff and whatever. So there's this idea that I consistently or more than once reach out to you, but with what frequency? Or in my last job, they never said frequency, they said cadence. So what's the cadence? And am I doing this? If it's somebody who I'm actively networking with right now that is really helpful in my job search, I might be reaching out to them every other day, right? If they've volunteered to be accountable or something like that. Okay, the next one, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, was Bob Berg's book, The Go-Giver instead of The Go-Getter. And I want you to make sure that when you are networking, you are focusing on giving and building and helping. There is no shortage of opportunities for us to give and build and help. And I want you to make sure that that's your focus instead of going into networking opportunities and saying, what can I get? How do I get from somebody or something? Years and years ago when I wrote my first book on LinkedIn, the thing that I heard the most was people would say, I'm on LinkedIn, but it's not doing anything for me. And I'm afraid that too often we take that mentality into what we do. And we're like, well, I have this relationship, but it's not doing anything for me. And I'm not saying to be in a bad relationship or to invest in a neutral relationship too much, right? But I do want to think about how we can give with no strings attached. And I believe that one day we're going to reap the benefits of that. In Never Eat Alone, Keith Ferrazzi talks about building relationship capital. like money in a bank. You're putting in capital, and that capital is worth something, and it might even grow. And one day you might need to pull it out, right? You might need to draw on that capital and get favors. Okay, the next principle, you have to know what you want from other people. Okay, so this is the other side of the coin to giving. I go to give, but inevitably people say, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? And for the first few years of Jibber Jobber, I didn't know how to answer that. I wasn't sure how to answer that. My mom, who was an entrepreneur, she was going to a local meetup, and she said, hey, I'm going to this thing and I want to promote Jibber Jobber. So what is it? Like, how do I promote it? How do I talk about it? And I was like, it'd been a year and a half or two before, since I had launched Jibber Jobber. And I was like, I don't know, Mom. I honestly don't know how to talk about it. It's almost 2 years old, and I didn't even know how to tell my mom to talk about it with other entrepreneurs. Now, granted, Jibber Jobber wasn't necessarily a product for other entrepreneurs, but this was a huge eye-opener for me when I should have known how other people could help me, but I didn't know how to describe that, and I didn't know how to tell them, and I didn't know how to help other people help me. And so that's something I really want you to do. I still come up against that today, where I'm on a phone call and I'm really focused on the other person, and at the end they're like, what can I do for you? How can I help you? And I'm like, oh yeah, that part. So I know it's hard to ask for help, and it's kind of hard sometimes to know what you can ask for that's effective. But my invitation is to you is to think about what you can ask for from other people, because they're going to ask. They're going to say, how can I help you? All right. The next one is that I really want you to think that networking is communication. You've seen the courses that I recommended on listening and emails and phone calls. Networking is communication, okay? It's not the numbers game. I give you permission. I needed permission. I didn't understand this, but I needed permission to not stress out about going to these big networking events and being able to think that I could network over a meal with just one person. And I loved that. I loved connecting with and meeting that one person and just digging deeper into them and their background and where they wanted to go and how I could help them. I felt like that was a lot more fun, for one, but also really quite effective. Now, I found those people from my meetups or from some networking online that I did locally, but I eventually wanted to do these personal relationships. And I didn't understand that that was okay until I read the book, Never Eat Alone. By the way, I've mentioned that a few times. So let me just mention my book recommendations for this course. The first one is Never Eat Alone. I highly recommend this. You can get it on audiobook. The other, it's not one single book. It's pretty much anything that was written by Harvey Mackay. Harvey Mackay is an entrepreneur, and he's written a number of books about entrepreneurship and networking. And really, if you read either one, they go hand in hand. He's grown businesses based on the networks that he has. And I love, he's kind of, in my mind, he's kind of the Zig Ziglar of the networking space. So really anything that you can get your hands on from Harvey Mackay is going to be good. Okay, let's see. The next thing, okay. Last thing is know your target companies. I mentioned yesterday that if somebody says, how's your job search going? We need to interpret that in our minds to, how can I help you in your job search? And part of the response in that is, here are my 3 target companies. I'm looking for introductions at these companies. Do you know anybody there? Right? I would do it a little more concise than that, but do you know anybody at my 3 target companies? You should always be able to list your target companies. And that really is one of the best ways when somebody says, how can I help you? What can I do for you? Immediately your response as a job seeker probably should be, I'm looking for introductions at one of my 3 target companies, do you know anybody who works at A, B, or C? That is just such a powerful question. Really, we're asking a yes or no question, right? We're not asking for names. We're not asking how well you know them or where they work. Or this is a lizard brain level question. Do you? Yes or no, right? And so if they say yes, then great. We'll go to the next step, which is to ask for an introduction. But really what we want to do is just ask that first lizard brain level question to get a yes or a no. All right, one last thing before we jump over to the next section. I wanted to just tell a quick analogy. So I have a beautiful daughter, love her to pieces because she's my daughter. She's 16. And for the last few years, anytime I go to the store, I invite my kids. I work at home, so I see my kids a lot. And or if they find out that I'm going to the store, they're like, I want to go. And so I have this one daughter who I ask her, I ask people when we get in the car, hey, does anybody want to buy anything? Like, what's on your list? And she will always say no. Nope, just want to go. But then she'll walk out with like a load of stuff in her arms. And I'm like, how did this happen? So I got to the point where I'm like, okay, you are not going with me you don't even get in the car unless you tell me what your intentions are. And it's frustrating as the dad to go shopping and she's like, I don't want anything. But then it's like $100 later, she has all this hair care product and I needed this shirt and blah, 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 whatever. And so I think sometimes when we start to reach out to network contacts, we feel like we're going in on the sly, but there's really this purpose. We don't want to tell them what the purpose is. But I really want, I want to give you my resume, or I want you to give me an introduction to your boss, or like do something really hard, but I'm not going to tell you up front, right? I think we need to get over that. We need to work through that. I don't want you being deceitful. It really is annoying if I get on the phone with somebody who wants to just catch up, and then all of a sudden they're pitching me on something that clearly that was their intention for the call, right? So I want you to think about being authentic and genuine and not being deceitful, and that's okay. If anybody that tells you how to network says, just make these phone calls, but here's what your other ulterior purpose is, and it's tricky and it's surprising, that's a problem, okay? So be upfront and let people know really why you want to connect. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about storm starter calls. All right, I'm going to just real quick look at the questions and I'll take a pause here real quick. And that says, nowadays, often I have to submit job application through a third agent like Indeed and Glassdoor. I don't always know the name of the company or the name of the person submitting to. How did the follow-up you mentioned in the previous session? So you're not going to follow up with somebody until you know who they are, right? So the whole idea of networking and follow-up really starts to come into play once they respond to you, and you have a name, you've gone in for an interview, you've shaken hands. Like once you get to that point, then you're going to be able to do that follow-up. If this is like a great opportunity, it's your dream job, dream role, I would not hesitate at all to go in and try and network into the organization. So apply on Glassdoor and Indeed, absolutely, do it, do the process. You got it. Sometimes you just need to get in the system, okay? But if you know the company name and you even have an idea of what department it is, I would go on LinkedIn or wherever you can go and start looking for ways to network into that department. And that's where I would reach out to somebody and say, hey, I saw this I saw this job. I'm not sure if it was in your department, but I'd love to talk with you about working there. Can I get 20 minutes on a call with you? That's how you can start networking with somebody at an opportunity, even though they might not necessarily know anything about it, but they'll know about the company. Okay, thank you. Anonymous says, hi, Jason, thank you for the series. You're welcome. I've had fun doing these. They've been really helpful. A question about how to use Twitter as a developer. How can I actually use it to build great relationships? Everyone says just post a lot and people would listen, but what do you even post on Twitter? That's a great question. I'm going to answer that when we go into the online section, because I'm going to talk about Twitter and a few other places. Norm says, I find it's best to schedule time to talk with someone whenever possible. Absolutely. I totally agree. If you're cold calling someone and you're nervous about cold calling them, I call that, there's this group of people. Okay, let's say you wrote down 20 people on your list of people that you know you want to network with. And there's some people, it's like, oh, I can't wait to call them and catch up and we'll have a great conversation. And then there's like 3 people that are like, I'm afraid to call those people. And that's what we call your chicken list. And so if there's somebody on your chicken list, then that's the ones that you might want to do a, do the off-hour call or something like that. But yeah, if you could schedule a time to talk with them, the ideal scenario to reach out to somebody is have someone do an introduction. I like email introductions. Do an email introduction with them and me, and then I will follow up from there and try and schedule something. That's my ideal scenario of the steps to get somebody on the phone. Okay, there's a private question, so I'm not going to say your name, but I'm going to say the question because it's a good question. How often do you check your LinkedIn account? I sent you a connection request last night. Thanks. I actually have an admin, personal admin, and she goes in and she responds to almost all of my my LinkedIn invitations. That's just because I'm high volume, and it really happened when I started writing books on social networking and speaking at social media conferences, because everybody there is like interested in connecting on LinkedIn. So I don't let that go to my head for sure, but I'm on LinkedIn and I'm usually checking messages, but I don't do anything with the invitations because I have her do that. Susan says, who is the author for Never Eat Alone? I didn't catch the name, and let me just write that here. Fit. Keith Ferrazzi is Never Eat Alone. It's just a little bit hard to spell, so I wanted to put that out there. I'll say anonymous. It's Galaxy S10 says, this is a follow-up to someone asking you, how can I help you? If you reply, I am looking for introductions to my 3 target companies, which are companies A, B, and C. Do you know anyone? You mentioned what to do if they say yes, but what if they say no? Just move on. It's okay if they don't know any. I mean, I wouldn't sit there and say, well, do you know anybody at these 3? How about anybody at these 3? How about anybody at these 3? I'm hoping that if I'm asking somebody if they know anybody at those companies, that we have some kind of relationship, even if it's a nascent relationship, but I'm going to hopefully be following up in the next few weeks or months or something like that. So I wouldn't worry about it if they say no. All right. I'm going to take a pause on the questions. Let's jump over to the next one. Informational interviews. Once again, there's a course on Pluralsight. It's an hour long, so it fits within the 10-day, 200-minute limit on free accounts. If you don't have a Pluralsight account, you can go in there and watch my course on informational interviews. So let me tell you 3 phrases that I say when I talk about informational interviews, okay? I call informational interviews networking on steroids. This is some of the most powerful and effective networking that you could ever do. When I remember when I was, there was this one year where I was traveling a lot and going to a lot of job clubs, and I'd say, who in here is doing informational interviews? And a few people, maybe 10 out of 100 would raise their hands. And then I would say, are they working for you? Are you getting any value out of informational interviews? And like 1 or 2 people would hesitantly nod their heads, and everybody else is like, not really. And my thought was, you're not doing it right. Informational interviews are so powerful, but you can really mess it up. If you go into an informational interview as a job seeker with your resume and your goal is to hand them your resume, listen, I've had people hand me my resume before and it's not cool. Like, I feel obligated to help them. I don't really do resume reviews. It's just not one of my things. I want to have a professional relationship with you, but once you hand me your resume, here's what happens. Remember, I've been talking about this colleague peer level where we're kind of on the same level. even though I might be unemployed and you're not, or even though you're a CEO and I'm not, right? But I want to have a peer colleague level relationship. The minute you hand a resume, this happens. I become a person in power and you become a needy person who wants into my power, right? And so what I want to do is keep that relationship, even at the end of an informational interview. I want to keep it. If somebody at the end of a relationship says, yeah, this has been great, Jason, do you have a resume? Now, old Jason would have said, yeah, absolutely, it's right here, here you go. New Jason says, oh yeah, I'll be happy to send it to you when I get back home. Because my purpose of being with you in that meeting was not to get you my resume. It was to start a professional relationship, right? That's part of that bait and switch that I talked about. For some reason, once the resume handoff happens, the relationship changes and the future of our relationship can't progress the same way as if we were peers and colleagues. Okay, so networking on steroids. I also call this, listen, folks, I don't believe in silver bullets, but I call informational interviews the closest thing to a job search silver bullet that you'll find. It is just one of the most powerful tactics or strategies you can implement in a job search. So having said that, I remember in Austin, Texas, I was at a job ministry. We were in the basement. It was dark. I don't remember why it was dark. Maybe because I had slides up. But anyways, I remember there was pillars around and it was a cool meeting, cool conversation, active crowd. And I was talking about informational interviews and I said this phrase and I've said it a lot since then, but I'd never thought about it before. So right on the fly, I thought, if I were in, so I said, if Jason Alba, and I don't talk about myself in third person hardly ever, but this time I do. If Jason Alba started a job search today, I would spend 90% of my time doing informational interviews. Now, that doesn't mean I'm in informational interviews 9 out of 10 hours, but I'm preparing for them. And I'm looking for them, I'm asking people, I'm following up from them, I'm doing research, right? I'm figuring out how I can have more, and I'm definitely doing them, but most of my time would be spent on informational interviews. Remember yesterday I was talking about this idea of job boards are 14% effective, or I should say 14% of jobs come through job boards. That's a statistic. The other statistic that I countered that with is like from Nick Corcadillos, Ask the Headhunter, is 1.3 or 1.4% of jobs actually come from job boards. Like that's ridiculous. My point was, and the thing I learned from this seminar that I went to was, if something only works 1% of the time, why are you spending 99% of your time on that ineffective tactic, right? And so as I've thought about this, I thought, if I were to do an informational interview strategy, a job search strategy, I would spend 90% of my time on informational interviews. Actually, I've been in business since 2006, so 14 years. And it was just last year, so a year ago, that I created the job search program. It's at jobsearchprogram.com. And it is all about, I handhold you day after day to do and get and be effective in informational interviews. All right, so let me just break down what this is. You want to find people. You're looking for people, right? So when I say, do you know anybody that works at this company? Can I get an introduction? When I get that introduction, what do you do? What do you do with that introduction? You want to have a meeting with them. I don't just want to send them an email. I don't want to send them my resume. I don't want to say, do you have any job openings? I want to get on a conversation with that person in my target company. Why? Because hopefully that person is going to introduce me after we talk and they trust me, right? We develop some trust. They're going to introduce me to someone else in their company that's closer to the department I want to work in, who's going to say, oh, you need to go talk to Kirk in the development shop. I want to network in, and I do this through informational interviews. How? I have conversations with people. They like me. I like them. Who else should I talk to? Oh, you need to talk to Kirk. I'm not really the right person because I don't even work in development, but my friend Kirk does. I have lunch with him every Friday, right? That's the process that we're going through. So I want to find somebody. I want to have a 20 to 30 minute conversation with them. That is the actual meeting. By the way, don't ask for an informational interview. You're just asking because your peers and colleagues, right? You're asking for 20 to 30 minutes of their time. Okay. And then at the end, there's 4 purposes of an informational interview, which I go through in the informational interview course. One of which is I want to get introductions. That's one of the main reasons why I'm there, is I want to get an introduction to somebody. And when I get an introduction, I follow up on that introduction. And now I have this cycle. I'm finding people, having the meetings, getting introductions, getting in front of those people, having the meetings, getting more introductions. And the more I do this, the closer I'm getting to the decision maker in my target company. Okay, so in my job search program course, not my course, but my job search program, at the beginning, you're practicing informational interviews with friends and family. You're just calling up whoever will listen to you, and you're practicing your questions, right? And you're getting your questions down and you're practicing having a good conversation within a 20 or 30 minute window. But within a couple of weeks, you're starting to find people that are in your target industry or your target companies. And then a couple weeks later, hopefully you're having informational interviews with people that are in the target department of your target company in your target industry, and having these conversations with decision makers and influencers, etc. All right. So that's informational interviews. I am a nut and a nerd for informational interviews. I think it's an awesome, awesome tactic. I think my job search strategies course, I talk about newsletters and I lay out what goes into a job search newsletter. In my effective email course, I talk about being concise. I really want you to have as short and to the point emails as you can, okay? Because we want our emails to be read and we want them to be responded to. And as we practice writing more concise emails, the likelihood that they're going to be read and responded to goes up, right? So I'm going to give you 3 elements of a job search newsletter. I think job search newsletters are brilliant. These are newsletters that go out to people who are interested in helping you. So people who say, how's your job search going? Maybe they should be on your newsletter. People who you network with, maybe they should be on your newsletter. People that you just interviewed with, don't put them on your newsletter. Wait until you've developed a real relationship with them and they're not in an interviewing and a decision-making phase with you when you put out this newsletter. Typically, this is something that I would do in email. I would only do this in email, although some people think they might want to send it out via regular mail. That's okay. I would do this in email. All right, here are the 3 elements of this newsletter. The first one, and there are 3 paragraphs, they're all short. The first paragraph is, where have I applied to or interviewed at or been interested in? So what companies have I had my eyes on? And this is something like this week, let's say you send it weekly. If you're in a real serious job search, I would send this weekly or maybe every other week. So this week I applied at jobs at eBay and American Express and da-da-da and da-da-da. And I had interviews at these 3 companies. And I just found out about this other company that I'm actually really interested in. So I want people to see that I'm having action and activity and see where I'm interested, okay? The second element of your newsletter is very similar, but instead of where, it is for what role. What's the job title? Now, here's one of the problems that we have at a job as job seekers. Let's say that we go to a network meeting and we introduce ourselves and say something like, I'm looking for a product manager role at eBay. Okay, so everybody that hears that is going to think of me as only being interested in working at eBay as a product manager. Okay. And so what I want to do is and I use this newsletter as a tool, I want to help you understand that I am open to more than just eBay and more than just product manager, okay? And so as I send these regular messages where I'm like, oh, and by the way, I looked at these two financial industry roles, and I looked at this healthcare companies. I looked at this healthcare company. I'm expanding how you think of me instead of just he wants to work at eBay and that's all he's going to settle for. You now start to think, oh, Jason's actually interested. It looks like he's looking for bigger companies, okay? So same thing with the roles. When I say, I have these two product manager interviews, and I applied for an operations manager or a general manager or something else at this smaller company, right? So what I'm doing is I'm taking away this carved in stone perception of he only wants to work there and he only wants to do this. Like, how many of you are developers that are open to being a manager, right? Or VP level? Some people aren't going to know that. They're just going to think, oh, they want to sling code. That's all they want to do. And they don't understand that you're actually open to other things. Believe it or not, some developers become sales engineers. It's kind of weird. It's really cool. The money can be great and it can be a lot of fun. And for some people, it's a better career than being a developer. But the issue is people don't know what you're open to except for what you've told them. And this newsletter helps broaden their perception of what you're open to. Okay, so thing one, where, the companies. Thing two, what are the roles that I'm interested in or I've applied to or I'm looking at. And then thing three is your ask. It is what you would call your call to action, where, remember, this is really short. You say, and this week I'm looking for introductions at company A, B, and C. And like I mentioned earlier, you can change the companies as often as you want. So you might say something like, this week I'm looking for companies at A, B, and C. And the next week you give 3 completely different companies. And the next week you give 3 completely different companies. Again, what this does is it helps people think, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that Jason was actually interested in all these other different things, but he is. And now instead of thinking, how can I help Jason network into eBay's product manager? I don't know anybody, so I can't help him. Now they start thinking, oh, I didn't know he was interested in working at the university or working at this or working at that or whatever. Newsletters are a great tactic to help you stay top of mind. They're also a great way to help people understand you differently and better. By the way, I have identified in my own life that every 18 months I have a brilliant idea. So Jibber Jobber was a brilliant idea. The job search program last year was a brilliant idea. This only happens every 18 months. The newsletter was a brilliant idea. It might sound really simple, overly simple, but I think this is one of the most effective tactics that you can use to help you as you network in your job search. And I should say, as you network and brand, because your newsletter is definitely a branding tool. All right, the next one is Storm Starter Calls. This is from my friend Mark LeBlanc, and he's an entrepreneur in Minneapolis. He teaches small businesses how to grow. He's a professional speaker. He's a phenomenal person. I definitely recommend watching. He has a bunch of free stuff online you can watch. But one of his tactics is what he calls a storm starter calls. And so the idea is that, the storm for a small business is like, oh, a lot of stuff's happening, crazy stuff's happening. And he's saying, here's how we get stuff happening. Because you have to understand, a lot of entrepreneurs are kind of like job seekers. They're like staring at their screen, waiting for something good to come in, but they're kind of afraid to pick up the phone, right? And business and job search happens through our networks. And so what he does is he makes a list of people that he hasn't talked to for a while, just for whatever reason, right? It doesn't matter why. But he has this list of people, and once a week, I think, he goes through and he calls 2 or 3 people, and he tries to have a 30-ish, maybe an hour-long conversation. And it really is just catching up. I've had these calls with him. These are not calls where he's trying to pitch me on anything or sell me on anything. These are just things where he really does just want to catch up, and he's interested in my life, and he wants to know about my family, and he wants to know about how business is going, and he wants to know about what I'm learning and things that I would recommend. And he shares some stuff also. But as I've been on the phone call with him, it's definitely been one of those how to win friends and influence people where he's doing a lot more listening, and he really is interested in me as opposed to him telling me all of the stuff that's happening in his life. So the key to this idea of storm starter is that you figure out that you're going to call a few people once a week and just have a conversation just to catch up. And as you do this, you're probably going to be on a call with people who are like, well, what are you up to? And how can I help you? And that's when you can say something like, hey, I'm actually looking at a career change, and I'm actually looking at a bunch of different things, but I'm interested in a few very specific companies. Do you know anyone who works at A, B, or C? Right? Isn't that a great response? And you can use that. Do you know anyone who works at A, B, or C in so many different scenarios? We talked yesterday in the job search strategy about Michael Webb's 6 weeks to multiple job offers. And the idea was that you have a group of 100 names, and you put them in 3x5 cards or 4x6 cards, and then you divide them out Monday through Friday. And so on Monday, you're going to pick out the 20 cards for that day, and you call those people. And then the next Monday, you call those same people. And the next Monday, you call those same people. There's a little bit of crossover between storm starters, the Michael Webb thing, and informational interviews. So like I said yesterday, figure out, this is eclectic. Figure out what you're comfortable with and what the things are that you can take and put together for your own strategy. The next one is be the creator. And if anybody can guess what I'm talking about here, I'll be impressed. I purposely left this ambiguous. So there's a guy local to me in the product management space. His name is Ben, and he created an online, I think it's a meetup. I think he started with meetups. So meetups are free. You can create a meetup account and start, putting your meetings out for free. So he created these meetups for product managers. And this has grown into a mentoring program where some more seasoned product managers are like, hey, I'm willing and available to be a mentor. And so they have this committee that matches up new product managers with more seasoned product managers. He actually, or this group just posted out a list, a job board for product managers locally when the whole quarantine thing happened. And people are talking about everybody's getting laid off and stuff like that. And they're like, hey, there's actually companies that are hiring in our space, and here's a list of them. And so Ben created an environment. He created, if you will, like a water cooler. He created this place where people that are similar to him will come and be interested in getting help or giving help or whatever. Now, here's the interesting thing. Ben isn't necessarily, probably, I don't know the guy. I've seen him at events, but I've never really chatted with him. Ben probably isn't the best product manager in town. And he'd probably tell you that. He might not be the most seasoned. He might not have the best resume. He might not have had the best experiences or training or et cetera, et cetera. He might not be the best, but he's the one who brought everybody together. Okay, it's kind of like when I wrote my book on LinkedIn. I shouldn't have been the person to write a book on LinkedIn, but I was. And next thing you know, I'm the expert on it. Well, here's what's interesting. As I go around the US and I talk at job clubs, I find people who are creating these networking environments. So for example, in Dallas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, there's a guy named Foster Williams, and he calls himself the job father. Actually, I don't know if that came from him or if somebody else called him that, but his nickname in town is the job father. And if you lose your job, you know that you need to go talk to the job father. And it's not that hard to talk with him because he runs almost one networking event every single day. Like, this guy is really, really busy. He has created an immense brand for himself. Now, I'm not saying that you need to create a job club. I'm not saying that you need to create anything like that. However, what if you were to create a LinkedIn group for people in your industry or in your profession in your local area, right? This could be a LinkedIn group, which is super easy. There's not really a commitment. It could be a meetup if you're willing to look for venues and schedule things and find speakers. I mean, that's more of a commitment. But you definitely, you could create something as simple as a LinkedIn group and bring people together. And I've seen some of these, they fizzle out around 15, 20, 30, 50 people. And I've seen others where they get into the hundreds or the tens of thousands. Like, this could really be a big deal. But the interesting thing is your name is on it as the creator. It's kind of like being Tom from MySpace. Right? Not to diminish anything that he did, but how many millions of friends or followers or whatever did he have just because he was immediately connected with everybody on MySpace. But the idea here is that as the creator of this networking event or that LinkedIn group or this meetup or that whatever, your name is on it. And it doesn't mean you're the best or the greatest or the guru, but it does amazing things for your network. All right, let me talk about, just real quick, because I meant to write this down and I didn't. This is actually a principle. I just touched on it. It is your space. There's this concept that I call your space. I want to network with people who are in my space. And my space is made up of three things. The first is industry. And like I said yesterday, as IT professionals, we can bounce around. Like, we're not stuck in one industry. We can kind of go to any industry we want to. The second is profession, or think job title or role, okay? So if I'm a product manager and I want to network with other product managers, then I go to other product manager places, right? And the third is geography. So your space is made up of industry, profession, and geography. And if you're in my industry or profession or geography, I'm probably interested in connecting with you. If you're in my industry and profession and geography, I'm really interested in connecting with you, right? You're more relevant to me and I'm more relevant to you. So as you think about growing your network, think about your space. And especially if you're proactively looking to add people to your network, then you're going to want to think about whether they're relevant to you, and they're more relevant to you if they're more in your space. That brings us to online networking. The three concepts that I have for online networking is your frequency. Again, how often do you do things? I say I fell out of love with Twitter a number of years ago, and then it's been about a year since I got back into Twitter, and I've enjoyed it quite a bit. But if you're going to have an online networking strategy, I recommend that you think about some kind of frequency. Even if that means that you go into your calendar and you block out 10 or 20 minutes, like Monday and Thursday, so that you can go make a post on LinkedIn or Twitter or something like that, then that's what you do. But think about your frequency. Number two, think about your messaging and what you're going to message, and is it on brand for you? And number three, I really encourage you to try and not be offensive. I know that a lot of people want to talk about things, especially right now. There's a lot of heated stuff online. And I'm not saying that you have to shy away from being honest and true to yourself and stuff like that. But if you're doing this for your career, you got to remember that Twitter and LinkedIn have a long lifespan, right? And what you put online might come back and bite you later on. I'm not saying that you can't say stuff, but you can be active on any of these social environments, and you can add value and you can give, And you don't even have to go into some of these very strong beliefs that can have an impact on your career. All right, I'm going to talk about 4 places: Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and this surprises a lot of people, but in my mind, it's a social environment, which is blogging. A blog is an awesome place that you can do online networking. So here's the blogging strategy. You can blog, you can write blog posts, and maybe, honestly, you could do, if you want to do it, then I recommend you think of doing like 1 post every 2 to 4 weeks. Keep it really doable. Okay. Not to overwhelm yourself. The other online networking part of blogging is going to other people's blogs that are in your space and leaving comments on those blogs or on their posts, or take a blog post that somebody wrote and then refer back to it, right? Link back to it and say, oh, over on the Jibber Jobber blog, Jason Alba wrote this. Here's what I think about what he wrote. And if you do that in a positive, constructive way, you can build some really amazing relationships. I said earlier in this series that blogging was one of the most, or maybe the most important, effective thing that I've ever done in my networking. Okay, so Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, for years, people have been comparing these to like cocktail party versus college hangout. Like one's more formal. Obviously, LinkedIn is more formal than the other. The thing that I found on Twitter is I've gotten more value out of Twitter as I have found people who are in my space. And in my space has nothing to do with geography. It could. I mean, there's people that are geographically close to me on Twitter that I communicate with, but I found more value in listening and learning and communicating with the dev segment of Twitter than, say, the social marketers, right? So if you get on Twitter, what I recommend is look for people who are on your space and then start communicating with them through tweets. You can through direct messages, but really it's more of a visual or a visible, like a community type thing than a one-on-one direct messaging thing. Okay, so I have 2 courses on LinkedIn, which you can go check out on Pluralsight. The 2 ways that I'm going to suggest to network on LinkedIn is through LinkedIn groups. So find groups that are in your space and you can connect. I don't know if they've changed it, but last I remember was up to 50 groups. And then you can communicate with other people who are in your industry or profession, or industry and profession, and then articles. And I love the idea of writing articles. It's kind of like using LinkedIn as your blog. So what I would do is I would write an article and then share it out to relevant groups. So we're in June. Well, shoot, we're halfway through. So I'm going to give you an example of something you could write. So what are the top 3 challenges that developers are faced with in 2020? That'd be a cool article. Or what are the top 3 opportunities for developers to grow in their career in 2020? Or something like that. Okay, so you can find these topic ideas, and what they do when you write about them, as I've talked about earlier, is it helps people understand your breadth as being wider and deeper, right? So I would recommend that you use LinkedIn articles as a place to share these things as a branding thing, but you're going to get people hopefully that see your article, they comment on it, they like it, and over time they start to follow you. This is a great way for you to proactively network with people that you want to have them listen to you. All right, the next one is offline networking. We're about ready to wrap up here and go into the question zones, and I see over a dozen questions, so I'm going to try and get to all of them today. So with offline networking, I think, as I mentioned early on, I give you permission to not think of this as just a place to collect business cards and hit certain number of people when you go to something, but to actually start developing one-on-one relationships. If I go to a networking event and I meet one person and I have one significant conversation with one person, and by significant, that could be the beginning of our relationship, where it's like, hey, let's meet next week or something like that. That's significant, okay? One of the most significant conversations I ever had at a conference was at actually a Pluralsight conference. And I was talking to the sales team and I said, what are the courses that your prospects are asking for? And we had about a 45-minute conversation, and it changed everything that I did for Pluralsight. It was one of the most significant conversations I've ever had. And it was at a multi-day conference, and I had gotten to the point where I didn't even care about how many people I was going to meet or how many business cards I was going to get or anything like that. I went with one purpose, and that was to have a significant conversation. And I did, and it impacted the rest of my career. It was really cool. One of the things I want to suggest with offline networking is figure out if you can volunteer. A lot of these groups have needs, and the people who put them on would love to have some extra help. And so if you can figure out how to volunteer, now you get the benefit, like we talked about, of being a creator without owning it or actually creating it, but you still get a piggyback on that benefit. All right, last one is follow-up. And I've talked a lot about follow-up. The one thing that I want to mention is that as you follow up, I want you to think about two aspects. There's short-term follow-up, which is I need to follow up right now. What do I do right now or on Friday or whenever the right time is to follow up from a previous thing. But I also want you to think about long-term follow-up, and it's what I call nurturing relationships over time, okay? So with that, remember, if you go to Pluralsight, if you don't have an account, you can get a 10-day or a 200-minute pass, and you can watch 1 or 2 or 3 courses, depending on how long the courses are. Basically, just go find a course. You're not logged in. You'll see a little pink button that says start 10-day trial or something like that. Next week, we're going to talk about onboarding yourself when you land your job. This is a proactive 30, 60, 90-day plan thing. And then on Tuesday, we're going to talk about finances in the job search as well as after your job search. And so I'm really excited about wrapping up this series with those 2 topics. Here's my homework for session 4. The first one is to make a list of people you should contact. This is networking 101. Make a list of names and don't disqualify them or pre-qualify them based on what you think. Write everyone down. I remember I did this once. I was supposed to write down a list of names, and I after 10 minutes, I had no names, because in my mind, I was like, well, not them and not them and not them. When we're making a list, we just write everybody. And we can do stuff with that later, but just put the names on your list. The next one is to call or email someone from your chicken list. I talked about a chicken list earlier, which is that group of people that you are afraid to talk to. And you know what I found power in actually calling or emailing them and getting them off your list. Even if they say no, even if they don't respond, at least you did your part and you can scratch them off your list. You get rid of some mental clutter when you do that. The third one is to follow up with someone today. Email, phone call, I don't care how you do it, but do it today, even if it's been a long time since you've communicated with them. All right, let's switch over to questions mode. Galaxy S10 says, my biggest issue, over 50, just moved to a new smaller town and COVID hit. I found one meetup, but what is a good strategy to network? So once again, I'll tell you exactly what I would do. But what I want you to think about is networking is not just going to meetups and going to these events. If I were you, I would go onto LinkedIn and try. I'm assuming that in your new smaller town, this is where you want to work. And there's probably a handful of companies. I lived in a small town for a long time. There was like 3 major employers and then a bunch of smaller employers. But I assume that that you're looking at a role in that smaller town. So what I would do is I would just jump on LinkedIn and start reaching out to people that are local and say, hey, just moved here and very interested in networking with people locally. Can we meet up at a Starbucks or something like that? And so I would try and have as many face-to-faces as possible, because I think there's a lot of value in that. But if people don't want to or can't or whatever, then do a Zoom call or however you can. But there are ways to find, and it's almost like cherry picking, where you're finding individuals that you could and should have a professional relationship with and start to have those relationships. Jim says, I live in a city with one major company. It is my former employer and my target company. I know plenty of people there, but they have a hiring freeze that may last all year. Now what? Man, what a crummy economy and tough time. And with your situation where there's one major company, one major employer, that just sounds like the sun, moon, and stars are not aligned in any way, right? Couple of thoughts that I have. One is, I was talking to a career coach who talks a lot about having a step job, which is basically a stepping stone, right? It's not your dream job, but it's something that you do while you're working on your dream job. So if I were in your situation and I really want to work there, and it's not, if they are hire freezing, then I might try and become a consultant. I'm really big on multiple streams of income, which we'll talk about on Tuesday. But I might even just hang up my shingle and say that I'm a consultant and I do these things. And you might cater that consultancy to the role that you want to have at that organization, right? Make them a match. Even if you don't get any jobs as a consultant, you could still say, I do this and I'm offering my services. And I think that might impress them and show them. But you might get jobs. You just might get jobs. So that's one thing that I would do. The other thing is I would look for opportunities in the same industry, but that I could do remotely, if that's a possibility. There a lot of changes have happened since March, where people are looking at remote employees and remote workforce. You might even have to go into a bit of a career change and do something different. If you do that, what I would recommend is look at where you want to be 5, 10, 20 years down the road and figure out, what other role could I do right now that would complement and prepare and help me get into my dream role at this one major company in a few years. So those are just some of the ideas that I would recommend there. Anonymous says, thank you for your series. They have been very helpful. I question about how to use Twitter as a developer. How can you actually use it to build great relationships? Everyone says just post a lot and people would listen. But what do you even post on Twitter? So I'm going to suggest that you go check out my Twitter. I'm at Jason Alba. And I will tell you, as you go through my tweets, hopefully you'll get a feel without this being overt. But now, as you look at it, you should get a sense that I'm very strategic about what I post. I'm very careful about what I post. Some things are just plain fun and funny, and they're personal. So and by personal, I don't mean like secretive, but I think it was Sunday night, I wrote a tweet that said something like, hey, if you're under 40, get in all the movies and shows you can now, because once you hit 40, a switch happens and you'll sleep through everything. And I used to make fun of my dad about that, and now I am my dad. That was my tweet, and I had over 50 likes on it. 50. Like for me, that's a lot. I like on Twitter, I'll promote my Pluralsight stuff, and I promote these webinars, and I promote Jibber Jobber, and I promote business stuff. But I also need to be a human and a person. And when you know that I have a garden, or I have chickens, or I have a rescue snake, these are all things that I've tweeted about before. These make me more human. They make me more real. And I want to have a long-term professional relationship with you. And I think in order to do that, I have to go beyond saying watch my course or sign up for Jibber Jobber. I have to go beyond those business things, and I need you to see me as a whole human. So those are some of the things that I would recommend. But really what I would do is go look at my tweets, and then there are some others in the dev space that are very popular or semi-popular, and just see what they're writing. See kind of the messaging that they're giving out. All right. Oh, Brett. Brett, who is Galaxy 10, says, I like the Storm Starter. It is less marketing push than newsletters. What type of results do you get from your newsletters? maybe it's just me, but it is too much in your face and about you and quickly delete it. Do you send this to your inner circle, or who's your target audience? I'm thinking positioning. Yeah, absolutely. This is your inner circle. These are people, there might only be 5 or 10 people on your newsletter. There might only be 20 or 30 people on your newsletter, but this is definitely your inner circle. These are people who know that you're in transition. They know that, that they want to help you, right? So this is not everybody in your LinkedIn. This is not everybody that you're connected to. You can invite people to get your newsletter, but you just make it clear, hey, this is what I'm doing with my newsletter. I'm keeping people up to date on how my job search is going. It's very short, and I share what companies and opportunities I'm looking for. And so I would say, if you need to soften the newsletter a little bit, then it's your newsletter, right? But I like the idea of keeping it very purposeful and very concise. So when people open it, they know exactly what they're going to read. Now, I read a newsletter from somebody who took my advice, although they changed the format, and they talked about their divorce. They talked about custody issues with their kids. They talked about all kinds of stuff. And oh, by the way, I'm looking for a job in this space. If you know anybody, let me know. And it was like watching this train wreck. Okay. And I'm not saying that you can't be human and you can't have problems in your life, but the purpose of this newsletter is not, hey, here's how I'm doing and here's what's going on in my life. This is a very specific job search newsletter. And again, for that inner circle. All right, Susan says, what other options can I use to send an email to ask for time, but cannot use a phone? I'm deaf, can speak, but rely on lip reading to chat. Susan, I've been really impressed with, and I think you have captions on for the Zoom call, because we talked about that earlier. I've been really impressed with the Hangouts technology. Now, I know in the deaf community, there's tools and there's things that you have access to that I don't. Like there might be apps or something like that. But I do have access to Hangouts, and I don't think there's anything wrong with you sending an email that says, hey, Jason, I'd love to have a conversation with you. I'm deaf, so we can't do it on a phone call, but we can do it on Hangouts because we can turn live captions on. I don't know what other systems there are that have those types of live captions, but the reason why I mention that is because I have Hangouts. Almost everybody I know has Hangouts or access to something like that. So if I were you, I would just say, can we do a video call, or can we do it on Hangouts or something like that where I can, so you'll know what those tools are, but just be upfront and say, hey, here's a situation. I need captions. Can we connect through this medium? And I think most people will be okay with that. One of the really cool things that happened with the quarantine back in March is that people who only dealt with phone calls, they started doing a lot more online conferencing and Hangouts and Teams calls and stuff like that. So I think the real message that I'm giving is use the technology that other people are going to have available to them. And Susan, I'm glad you came to this one. On Twitter, Susan has said, oh, darn it, I missed it again. So I'm glad that you're on this one. Anonymous says, when following up after an interview, I understand to thank them for their time. Is the end goal to ask where you, as the interviewee, are at in their process? If you're moving forward, what's the question you ask every follow-up to be the most effective? So very specifically with that question, I'll ask, where are you at in the interview process, or something along those lines. You can Google the questions to ask at the very end of, how do I compare with others? So go out and find some of those questions online, put them all together and figure out what you're most comfortable asking. The easiest question for me is, when should I expect to hear back from you? And with that might be, if I don't hear back from you Friday, is it okay if I reach out to you on Monday or something like that? So I would definitely say the end goal is not to ask where they're at. the end goal of the interview process is to impress them that you are capable and you're the right person for the job. That's really what my end goal is. That I'm the best qualified person. I'm going to be a great fit, stuff like that. That's what my end goal is. But at the end of the conversation, I think it's fine. Now, if I were to say, when should I expect to hear back from you, or when are you going to make a decision on this? And they kind of are really vague about the answer, I might read into that they're just not that interested in me. Okay. So I know the interview process and the job search process is so emotional. It's this massive emotional roller coaster, and it doesn't need to be, but it is, because there's too many humans. Norm says, if people feel that your only motivation is to get job leads, they certainly won't want to speak with you. You need to offer some value that they can use. Absolutely, 100% agreed. Even in your informational interviews, in all of your networking, give. You need to give. You need to listen for opportunities where you can add value to them. Thank you, Norm. Norm says, based on what you're saying, sounds like you shouldn't even mention that you're in a job search, because that will quickly change how the conversation goes, or they're not wanting to talk about you in the first place. So I don't want to give that impression. Okay. So I don't want you to hide or be deceitful about your status, what I call your temporary status as a job seeker. But I don't want that you're a job seeker to be your main purpose. Now, if you come talk to me, I'm going to get there real quick, because this is what I've been doing for a living for the last 14 years. And I'm interested in your career, and I want to hear about your career, and I want to dig into how I can help you and how I can help you network and things like that. But a lot of times, what I'll do is I'll say something kind of nonchalantly, like, yeah, I'm in transition, or I'm exploring I'm looking into different career opportunities. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm going to downplay the idea that I'm a desperate job seeker. I think that's the key, is I can't come across as a desperate job seeker. Now, if you've seen my checkbook, I'm a desperate job seeker, right? Like, I haven't had income for the last 3 or 4 months, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to pay I don't know where my runway is to pay the rest of these bills. I'm desperate, and I have this sense of urgency that's driving me nuts, and it's extremely stressful, and this is really all that I want to talk about. But I can't network that way. I've seen it. I've tried it, not intentionally or on purpose, but I've done it. And it just, I don't have the right spirit of networking or giving. And I find that people aren't as helpful as if I am a stable peer-to-peer or colleague-to-colleague relationship. Norm says, why do people keep focusing on job boards? Because it gives them the false feeling that they're actively looking, even if the results are minimal. Job boards are easy. They're the easy button, even though they're a pain. I remember in 2006, and it's not different now, but my last major job search in 2006, when I was desperate, I would apply for a job and it would take 45 minutes to an hour, and it's like, upload the resume and then copy all the fields your resume into all these fields. And it was so frustrating. And then at the end of an hour, something failed, right? And it's like, you want to pull your hair out, and it was just so frustrating. But even then, it's easier to apply online than it is to pick up that 500-pound phone. It's easier at the end of the day to say, I applied to 5 jobs online, and this is just a numbers game, and eventually one of those jobs is going to hit. It's easier to do that than to say, I spent 6 hours, getting ready for, driving to, being at a networking event, coming back home, undressing, right? It's just easier to have some metrics like that and apply than it is to do the things that are actually more effective. So. All right, Anonymous says, just a quick question. What if you come across the profile of a recruiter at your dream company and it states hiring for ... How do you reach out to them? Would it be like a LinkedIn in-mail, maybe something like, hey, I came across your profile and I read about your hiring for these positions. Would it be possible to connect for a short 15-minute call? where we can discuss more about the opening and how can my skill set can actually help. Would this be a good first step? I don't think that's a horrible first step, honestly. I think that's an okay first step. I have found that a lot of messages get lost in my in-mail, in my LinkedIn inbox. Recruiters should not have that problem, okay? If you send a message like that through LinkedIn in-mail, and I say that because recruiters are on their LinkedIn a lot more, like that's a serious tool for recruiters. If you send an email or an in-mail like that through LinkedIn and you don't hear from them, then I would try and follow up with them any other way that I can. So on LinkedIn, even if you're not connected with somebody, right towards the top of their profile, there's a link that says contact info or contact whatever. You can click on that and find out what their email address is or whatever they've made available to people they're not connected with. My first preference is to hit your email. Recruiters are phone people generally. They're not afraid of being on a phone. So I don't think it would be necessarily bad to reach out to them. Let me recommend, Anonymous, that if you're ready and willing to have that conversation, go check out Dave Perry's Guerrilla Hunting for Job Seekers. He has a blog, and I think it's just the acronym of Guerrilla Hunting for Job Seekers, and the 4 is the number 4. But go check out his blog posts and just get ideas of how he recommends that you are a guerrilla and that you communicate with people and make yourself different than, and this isn't like really weird, crazy stuff, but it's different enough to get in front of and have the right conversations and impressions. So good question. I would say that what you proposed is better than nothing. Just one more quick question or one more quick comment on that. A lot of times we think that the recruiters are the way into the job. And if you've worked in or with or around recruiters, you know that the hiring managers are the decision makers. You know, recruiters internally are consultants to the hiring manager or the department manager. And so what you really need to do, in addition to whatever you do with recruiters, is try and figure out how to network into the hiring department. Okay, Anonymous says, a question about how to use Twitter as a developer. How can I actually use it to build great relationships? Oh, sorry, that one was already answered. The part I didn't answer is about relationships. Go follow other people that you want to build relationships with. There are people that I want to network into and have conversations with. And so I will follow them and I'll comment on their stuff. I'll like their stuff and I'll retweet their stuff. So if you want to build great relationships on Twitter, you need to interact with these people in addition to just posting stuff on Twitter. Daniel says, how do I move my online network into an offline network that could be more valuable? I want you to not discount the value of online. There really is a lot of value. You and I have never talked, but over the last, I think, few months, you and I have tweeted back and forth. And I consider us to have some kind of professional relationship. If I understand correctly, you're in Africa, and I don't have any plans to go to Africa right now. I'm not sure that we'll ever meet in person, but you and I could have a valuable professional relationship, okay? So don't discount the online stuff. But to answer your specific question, how do you go more offline? Find people in your online and invite them. Whether you invite them to a lunch or a coffee or a breakfast or whatever, go invite them and do something face-to-face. If you're not going to be face-to-face, see if you can do Zoom or a Hangouts or a phone call or something like that. And that's still online, but now you're getting a more personal relationship. Brett says, thank you for answering my questions. My big issue is networking during COVID, wearing a mask and social distancing. What are your thoughts? I honestly, with COVID, I would really spend more time trying to set up Zoom meetings and online conferencing. I know people, or at least people are talking about getting fatigued with that. But I think you're going to get the visual cues. You're going to get eyeballs and you're going to see facial expressions and you get the convenience of not having to travel anywhere. So you can have more and they cost you less, right? They cost less time or whatever. So I would definitely look into doing that. However, I don't know where you live, but where I live, a lot of things have really opened up. There's been a lot that's opened up. And so I actually had a meeting scheduled for right after this, but that got canceled. But we can go to restaurants and stuff like that. So do what you can, but don't discount the power of doing one-on-ones online. So with that, folks, we are at the top of our 90 minutes. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you for coming. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you on Monday and Tuesday. Feel free to share this series out socially, and let's get some more people in here and help more people as we get back to work. We'll talk to you next week.